This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Hello and welcome to The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand. I'm Joe Hildebrand and this is the real story behind what is happening in the news this week. And what a week it has been. Donald Trump, another assassination attempt. What is going on here? How many times are these guys going to try to get rid of this guy? And how much is he going to go up in the polls every time they do? Plus, they say all politics is local. So what do the New South Wales local government elections mean for Anthony Albanese and the Labor government? And we talk to the man behind the breaking of the Heston Russell scandal that has engulfed the ABC. All that and more coming up. First up this week, I want to talk about the New South Wales local government elections. Now, I know a lot of you don't live in New South Wales, and I know that even those of you who do live in New South Wales don't give a rat's ass about local government elections. But this is the first real test of where the various political parties stand since there's been the blow-up in the cost of living crisis and the blow-up, of course, in the war in the Middle East. And the really weird thing about these local government elections was that in a lot of ways, the biggest issue wasn't about local government at all. In fact, it was about a war that was taking place in the Middle East, is still taking place in the Middle East. You had campaign posters, corflutes of Labor candidates especially, because they were associated with the federal government, accusing them of genocide. I didn't really know that the Australian government was committing any genocide, and I'm pretty sure that Labor councils aren't committing genocide. I don't think they actually have that power in their bylaws. But this was the campaign that was being waged against them. Again, had corflutes splashed with red paint because, it's like blood. Get it? Because they got blood on their hands. You had corflutes of, for example, the Inner West Mayor Darcy Byrne, not just being splashed with red paint, but also slashed with a knife, which is pretty ugly. And again, other corflutes in the Inner West and Waverley Council, so the Inner West and the eastern suburbs, real battler suburbs there, aren't we? This is obviously something that's resonating with the workers of Australia. But yes, in the leafy Inner East and Inner West suburbs, that's all they can talk about, apparently. The war in Gaza and how that this has to be tackled along with rates, roads and rubbish. Hey, can you fix my potholes? And also the situation in the Middle East. I saw it with my own eyes at the place where I was voting. There was Labor candidates there and Labor volunteers handing out how to vote cards, and handed it to one person who was walking in. They just said, "Free Palestine." It's like, well, given that they're just trying to get elected to a local council ward, I don't think they have the power to free Palestine. I'll have to go back and check. But, if the entire UN can't free Palestine, how do they expect the Inner West Council to do it? And this is the insanity of it. Not only is it just incredibly stupid because you're just talking to someone who has absolutely no power, no ability, nor indeed motivation to do what you're demanding they do, which of course you yourself are incapable of doing. But it's also insulting. It's also I care so much about genocide and all the thousands of innocent people being killed that I'm going to stab a corflute. It's like, you're in the wrong place, mate. Go and join Save the Children. Go and join an aid organisation. Maybe go and try to fly into Gaza. You could put your life on your line, the money where your mouth is. That's how you care that much. Or you could do a degree in international relations. You could become a diplomat, help negotiate a peace settlement between Israel and Gaza. Or you could just speak to, your local MP. You could write a letter because maybe they then could have a vote on Australia's position. But no, you'd much rather just throw paint around, sit outside on a deck chair outside a local MP's office, or maybe smash their window, bit of that, but that maybe deface the war memorial. But no, that's not enough. You've got to go local. Think global, act local. So you go after your local government candidate, your local council candidate, or maybe not even the candidate, maybe just a volunteer who's handing out how to vote cards for that, because that'll show them. They're going to go, what's the first order of business? Oh, we're going to free Palestine. Okay, all those in favour? That'll work. And it's also so insulting to the import of what is happening, the importance, the gravity of what's happening. It's terrible what's happening in Gaza. There is no question that the thousands of people being killed by airstrikes and other methods in Gaza, it's awful. It's a tragedy. And the idea that you would respond to that awful tragedy by kicking up a stink at your local government level, by kicking up a stink in front of some volunteer handing out how to vote cards for a council candidate. But how has this actually gone? How has this actually affected the local government results? Well, an insider has produced a few little interesting tidbits, a couple actually, on both sides. One is the Greens have lost or failed to regain mayoralties in Randwick, eastern suburbs, where the Greens MP was very, very pro-Palestine, as well as Byron, Tweed, Bellingen and Shoalhaven, where you have all the tree changes going on. And what happened in the inner west, where, of course, all the activists are absolutely all in on Palestine? Well, the Greens did not get their mayoralty and did not get a majority. So they can't even get a majority or a mayoralty in the inner west. Where are they going to go next? Penrith? Don't think so. At least in Australian elections, no one is actually trying to shoot the candidates. In America, they've actually tried to shoot the same candidate twice. That's unlucky. 3 times you'd start to take it personally. But yes, Donald Trump has suffered a second assassination attempt. And I'm not just talking about what happened during the debate when he said that people in Springfield, Ohio were eating their dogs. That did not go particularly well. But that was just a political assassination attempt and a pretty successful one. This was an actual real life with a gun, just like it was in that rally, attempt by a crazed gunman who's now been taken into custody to actually shoot Donald Trump. The Secret Service this time actually spotted the bloke. That's a refreshing turn of events, isn't it? And they got a few shots off before he fled in his car, and then they arrested him and he's gone down. And he's just a crazy. Again, these people are all over the shop. I think he volunteered to go fight in Ukraine. Strangely, never made it there, but at least came armed with his own gun. And I think he voted for the Democrats, voted in a Democrat primary, I think, in 2012, but then said that he voted for Donald Trump in 2016. This guy is just all over the shop. And you often find that people who, want to go around shooting presidential candidates are not usually repositories of the most sort of considered, well thought out, balanced political theory. And I don't know why these people, and this guy, again, unlike the previous shooter, this guy is alive and we know his background. We know that he really didn't like Donald Trump. He said he felt terribly let down after he voted for him. He realised his terrible mistake after he allegedly voted for him in 2016. And obviously the only way to atone for that mistake for Donald Trump, for voting for Donald Trump, is to kill him. I mean, that just makes perfect sense to everybody. So, why not go to the golf? The guy was playing golf, he was at his most relaxed. That's the meanest time to kill somebody, He's just chilling out. He's playing a few rounds. The Secret Service are out there advancing each hole at the time. This is the most amazing thing. So the Secret Service apparently is so overstretched, they couldn't just scope out the whole golf course at once. They had to go, all right, he's on the 8th hole. Somebody better check out the 9th. Okay, the 9th is clear. All right, I'll do the 10th. I mean, what if the guy kept getting holes in one? He'd end up ahead of the Secret Service. Donald Trump is safe, whether you like that or not. The Democrats, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, of course, are falling over themselves to say how glad they are that he's safe, how glad they are. And so they should be. Donald Trump is a human being. However, why do these people keep trying to increase the popularity of the bloke they say they hate so much? Now, Trump is actually taking a bit of a hit after the debate, and I think he's probably lost the election as a result of it. He was so close to coming back in the lead up to the debate. The polls were tightening, and then he just has to go and say, after winning the first half hour of the debate, Kamala Harris sounded like she was just had no idea what she was talking about. You'd say, you say to Kamala Harris, what's 2 + 2? And she'd say, well, I grew up in a middle-class family where we were proud of our lawns. That's just not the answer. How are you going to fix the cost of living crisis, Kamala? Well, I grew up in a middle-class family where we were proud of our lawns. I was raised by a mother and a second mother who was a small business person, and I support small business people. It taught me the value of small business, yeah? So she keeps just saying the same thing over and over again. Donald Trump came in swinging. He was talking about border security, talking about the economy, areas where the Republican Party and Donald Trump are up 8 points or so, like huge margins over the Democrats. Talking about all that, then he suddenly starts saying they're eating their dogs. And I hate to break it to you, it's just not true. There was someone who was allegedly eating a cat. Turns out she's American. They've probably been doing it for years. And so Trump is down and out. Trump's on the skids. He's got no comeback for this. So what does someone go and do? Go and make a martyr of him again. He was shot up by half a dozen points the last time someone tried to kill him. Amazing scenes, amazing shots, and now they go and do it again. I mean, I don't want to tell Donald Trump how to run his campaign, but if he's worried about assassination attempts, I'd probably be telling them people to do them more often. So another big story in the week, which is all about the real story behind the real story, which it turned out was not a real story, is that of Heston Russell and the way that this former Australian commando, hero soldier by any other definition, was dragged through the mud by the ABC. And someone who has been all over this and has been in deep with the Heston Russell story and how it all unfolded is my next guest, the great James Willis. He's the head of pretty much everything at the Daily Telegraph, but Daily Telegraph Television, and also was in the hot seat at 2GB, which first broke the Heston Russell scandal, namely that there was no scandal attached to Heston Russell, no matter how the ABC tried to portray it. But let's just rewind and go back to where it all began. James Willis, welcome to The Real Story. How are you?
Joe, great to see you. Can I applaud you for your constant innovation, finding ways to create content. Another great podcast. I've been loving it. Love your column every week.
Thank you for
my old man is your number one fan. Steve would be listening to this, so he loves you.
Your old man clearly has an incredibly great pedigree in young, good-looking blokes.
You keep finding ways to reinvent yourself. And I think the best people in our industry
I keep getting fired.
I wasn't going to say that, but you've had a fair few gigs, right?
Had a fair few
Any
gigs.
network you haven't been on over the years?
I don't think there has been.
You're brilliant. You're brilliant.
God love you. Thank you very much. I didn't even know you were going to say that, but now that you have, the check's in the mail. Now, you are also an absolute superstar who's worked across all manner of media, and you were right there at the very beginning of when this Heston Russell story broke. Firstly, just give us a bit of background. Who is Heston Russell and what was his role in the war in Afghanistan?
Heston Russell served in Afghanistan more than a decade ago. He was the commander, the boss of an outfit called November Platoon, who were with the commandos that were part of Task Force 66, which is effectively our specialist soldiers that did all the missions and all the frontline combat in Afghanistan. He is a multi-generational soldier, someone that has been around the military since the age of 18, enlisted, rose through the ranks very quickly to be in charge of this particular unit. And ultimately what happened was when he left the military, in the years that followed, we heard from the Army that there were concerns about possible allegations of war crimes. We had the Brereton Report, which ran for a number of years. And around about that time, the media started taking its own stance on these things. The ABC was leading the charge, but there were others that were beginning to highlight and allege a number of claims of war crimes by Australian troops. Now, ultimately, Heston was most probably the first soldier to come forward, reveal what he did, and begin to deny and fight back against some of these claims by the ABC. Eventually, when the ABC refused to apologise for an initial story that we'll talk about soon, they then doubled down, wrote more stories about him, looked into his private life, refused to apologise, refused to take the stories down, and this went all the way to the federal court, where ultimately Justice Michael Lee ruled that Heston had been defamed in a series of stories, and those stories have been taken down. But it was only because of his fight, which took 4 years in the end, that the ABC was finally held to account. On Sunday night, Spotlight on Channel 7 did a whole 1 hour show on the Heston Russell defamation case, and as part of that revealed that in one of the videos shown by the ABC and its investigations reporter Mark Willis, who's a Gold Walkley winner, that it appeared that up to 6 gunshots had been added to this mission video from Afghanistan. The ABC was asked that question and they responded by taking that video down and acknowledging that was an error. And that's why this story has been big over the past few days. And ultimately, the ABC is now, I believe, in damage control about its entire war crimes coverage because they've had to remove at least 3 stories from the internet in the past 12 months. But there are probably others that are worthy of a second look given what has occurred here.
And this is an extraordinary development in a situation where this comes post Justice Lee's finding that, in fact, the ABC had defamed Heston Russell and that its claims are not substantiated. This is something that has emerged since then, this alleged doctoring of the audio. So it sounded like 6 shots appeared in a segment where, in fact, there was just 1 shot, which we can dive into maybe later. But just at the very beginning, he was the accusation made by the ABC on 7:30, I believe, was that he had, or his November platoon had shot and killed an Afghan civilian or a person and got on a helicopter because there wasn't enough room otherwise on that helicopter, which seems to be a pretty flippant reason to kill somebody. That would have raised a red flag with me. But anyway, take us through the original charge as made.
So it was there's a technicality there because the initial story did not mention November platoon. It spoke about the wider commando unit, but it was based on, and this story went to air in mid to late 2020 in the lead up to the Brereton report coming out. And it was based on the account of a US Marine from a mission. At that stage, it would have been 8 years earlier, who had contacted the journalist Mark Willis and said, I might have a story for you. However, the Marine said up front that his memory was hazy or foggy of the incident. He didn't know who the Australian soldiers were. He didn't know the specific dates. He was really rough on details. And Mark Willis sat him down for an interview on camera, didn't conceal his face, didn't name him, but his face was on camera, this US Marine. And the Marine said that he was on a helicopter evacuation mission in 2012 with the Australians. He was in the helicopter at the time. You can imagine the whirring and all the noise. He had a headset on. And he'd heard a pop sound over the radio, which he assumed was the Australian soldiers executing an unarmed prisoner. He thought the pop was a gunshot. He never saw anything. He never told anyone in command. It was never reported. And all those years later, told that to journalist Mark Willis, and Mark put that to air as a claim of a new war crime allegation by the Australian soldiers in the lead up to the major Brereton report, which found credible evidence of this.
Well, this is where it does get hazy because this is the thing that caught up most famously Ben Roberts-Smith.
Yes.
Where another court case found on the balance of probabilities, a civil court case, not a criminal one, it's important to say, but on the balance of probabilities that he did commit war crimes. And do you think there was just a sort of rush of blood to the head here where a whole bunch of media outlets, perhaps the ABC more especially, they have a history, I suppose, in being quite critical of the military or reporting critically of the armed forces, that they said, right, well, we've got to find, there's war criminals everywhere, we've just got to find them. Because it seems to me a very, as I said, spurious basis on which to sort of hang a pretty full-on accusation.
Absolutely. And it wouldn't meet the threshold to report on a range of other issues that the media reports on every day. For someone to hear something and say, oh, that was an execution. I mean, my editor would not run that. I don't think you've worked with an editor that would allow that to run without verifying it. That was the only source for that story. And so Heston Russell heard this and he knew that he was in Afghanistan when all this was going on, came forward and said, I was with November Platoon. This did not happen. This never happened. This mission didn't even occur. And it was then that the ABC started to sort of go after him effectively. Mark Willis tried to FOI, Freedom of Information, the mission dates. He got those wrong. It was clear that didn't match up.
That's right. He wasn't even in the same place.
Wasn't even in the same place at that time. They then wrote a second story to say that defence had confirmed a criminal investigation into this mob November platoon and reheated the pop allegation in that story, named Heston Russell in that story, even though he wasn't part of any of the initial claims by the Marine. And that was where the defamation occurred, and that was when the ABC had a real problem. Had they acknowledged that in late 2021, the entire court case could have been avoided, and instead it cost taxpayers millions of dollars in legal fees and everything else. But in regards to the ABC, I think it's really, I don't subscribe to the let's bash the ABC campaign.
No, that's right.
Because I think there's a lot of good people there, and I think they do some excellent reporting. Historically, Four Corners and programs like that were the things that would, on a Tuesday morning, you could guarantee would be driving the agenda of the media and politics, and the Prime Minister would be responding to the appalling allegations from last night. But in regards to war crimes, the ABC ran a 4 or 5 year campaign where it was clear that at every opportunity, every little bit of footage, every claim, every rumour, the direction that they took was to reheat that and present it to the public like there were some bad eggs in the Australian military, and the entire force, I wouldn't say the entire force, but there were many people involved in breaking the rules of war. And I think for the public broadcaster to do that caused enormous damage to the perception of the military for a number of years in the eyes of certain sections of the community. And that's terrible, Joe.
And you were the executive producer for Ben Fordham when all of this was exploding. You broke most, if not all, I think, of the major developments on the Heston Russell side of things, where the ABC had got things wrong or where he was contesting it. The journalist obviously got quite, I think there was a moment where Mark Willis, the journalist, understandably perhaps was very stressed by this sort of stuff. He was calling in and trying to get his side of the story up. Just to talk us through what it was like in that kind of pressure cooker environment where you had Heston Russell on one side, Mark Willis on the other, and you're trying to get to the bottom of what has actually happened here.
Well, because the ABC initially refused to apologise or to take this claim down or even to accept Heston's complaint, they said, you've complained too late, we don't accept complaints this late. Then basically Ben on air on 2GB bashed this issue over and over again with any new bit of information. We spoke to other soldiers, something the ABC wasn't able to do. We spoke to other soldiers that were part of November Platoon that all said this did not happen. And eventually the ABC was forced to accept this complaint. And then when they refused to take the story down and they only just put a correction on there, which they do sometimes, which, doesn't actually fix the allegations in the first place, Heston took legal action. And that was when we continued to just cover little bits and, whatever was coming out in the legal documents and everything else. I remember the morning that I put a question to the ABC based on what they had in their legal documents under their truth defence when they were being sued by Heston Russell, which said Heston Russell was seen shooting from a helicopter in a video that we have. Now, it turns out the video Mark Willis had was a highlights reel, which was 15 seconds of what was a wider, 5-10 minute mission that was on a helmet cam. He believed, and he'd been told it was Heston shooting from the helicopter in this mission. Heston had the raw helmet footage, and it was only when the camera turns that you can see Heston's in the chopper, but he was not firing the gun. That is the story that has been allegedly doctored by the ABC that we've heard about this week. But when I asked the ABC about that, instead of getting a call from publicity or someone in management, the phone rang at about 8:45 one morning when we were on air with 2GB, and I didn't know the number, picked up, and I said, hello. His voice on the other end said, James, it's Mark Willis. And then 2 to 3 minutes later, he had stopped, but it was a very aggressive and very angry phone call where he basically told us to back off. That was followed up with a call to a senior person at 2GB telling him that we should back off as well. And that, to me, I think there's an old rule in journalism that if someone speaks to you like that, you're on the right track. And to me, that indicated that we were onto a good thing here.
Someone wants to find journalism, I think, as revealing things that people don't want to be revealed.
Yes.
If you're pleasing people, you're probably not doing it right.
But it was a moment of madness from Willisy, who is a long-time journalist at the ABC, has won multiple awards, is considered to be... And this is the whole thing with this, Joe, is that the ABC investigations team is meant to count for something. If you see it's an ABC investigation on a casino, or if it's on, a corruption inquiry or a major story that they spend months working on, then there is meant to be integrity about that. And the way they were reporting on war crimes was so far below the standard of journalism that it wasn't funny, and it is now coming home to roost in a number of ways.
And this is, it strikes me very much as the sort of, after Pride comes the fall. The fact that they weren't prepared to just initially apologise, correct the record, and pay Heston's legal fees, which was all he was after in the first place. It's then snowballed into this massive court case. It's been an embarrassing finding against them. Poor Mark Willis's reputation, because he, again... And look, I think we all know, as a journo, as a human being, it's hard to say sorry and admit you were wrong. But it does seem to be that because of this kind of stubbornness, they've just been driven deeper and deeper and deeper into the ground. And now we have the revelation of this allegedly doctored audio of a gun being fired 6 times in the audio that was published on the website. In fact, it was only once. And that 6-shot audio appears to have been duplicated from another segment of the video and another round of the gun. And normally you'd say, well, maybe that was just a production error when they were putting it together. But when you add it to all the other stuff that's gone before, you think, well, hang on, could this actually be the broadcaster trying to, retrofit this video to their original? Like, again, it raises questions and suspicions that would not have been there if they had have just sort of fessed up and stuck to the straight and narrow in the first place.
Yeah, I don't know what has gone on here, and the ABC is obviously investigating it, but I do know that for any journalist and any newsroom that is working on a big story like this, it is not the kind of thing that you say to a junior member of production or someone in the editing suite, hey, it's all yours, put it up, I might watch it one day. You're sitting there, you're watching frame by frame, you're listening, you're watching for errors. And so and look, Justin Stevens, the boss of the ABC, has said they're looking into this, and I until that comes out, I don't want to say one way or another. But I think the idea of this being an error is interesting to me, because when you, in isolation, maybe, but as part of a wider campaign, having already had to take down a number of war crime stories for a number of reasons after defaming someone, there's a new allegation we published in the Daily Telegraph today in another story from someone from the US DEA who served alongside Australian soldiers, who was told by Mark Willisy, I want to do a positive story about the Joint Task Force and Task Force 66 in Afghanistan. Was told, I'm going to do a positive story. I'm not interested in going down the negative path. And when this man, Brett Hamilton, did the interview with the ABC, he was asked an open, very reflective question about war crimes in general and how they should be reported on. He gave a very general answer and then told us today that he was appalled to discover that when it went to air on the ABC, at the end of a 12-minute package where there'd been allegations of Australians murdering Afghan prisoners, that his soundbite, in his words, had been manipulated to make it look like he was calling for an investigation specifically into the Australian soldiers on that mission. He wants the story taken down. You can understand why. But these hits keep coming. And there'd be an argument to say, hey, the dozens of stories we did on war crimes over that period, led by Mark Willisy, someone at the ABC should be sitting down and checking the homework on all of them and saying, look, just so we know, are there any other gunshots that you've added? Have you misquoted anyone here? Like, is this story a problem? Can you show me the original interview before you cut this together? Because we're now under serious pressure. And ultimately, Joe, we are talking about, I think, the most serious thing you can accuse someone of. We're talking
people
about
who are charged with defending the country and doing the right thing, doing the worst possible thing in that role.
Correct. At a time when we have a concerning shortage of people joining the military. And we have an issue with recruits, and we keep being warned we have to get this number of soldiers by this year, otherwise we won't be ready for war. And yet we've heard in the last 2 weeks that 2,000 veterans have died by suicide between 1985 and 2001. We've heard 9 officials or officers are going to be stripped of their medals coming home. And we've heard this ongoing campaign in the media by a range of journalists that are accusing our soldiers of war crimes. Now, who in their right mind would join the military off the back of that?
That's right. And again, this is a problem that is real enough without having to add people who have actually served their country with incredible honour, who have been highly decorated, who have an impeccable service record, an impeccable pedigree, and tarring them with the same brush. It's not like we need more war criminals than we've already got.
Absolutely.
You know, why are we looking? And again, we don't want to sort of get into a journo bashing exercise or an ABC bashing exercise, but for a media organisation that actually sort of holds itself at a higher level, that has programs both internally and externally, like its own fact check unit and Media Watch, which fact checks other organisations and their claims and judges them, for them to have got something so spectacularly wrong, you kind of think, well, God help the rest of us and God help where we are. James Willis from the Daily Telegraph, formerly of 2GB, thank you so much for joining us on The Real Story.
Great to see you, Joe. Thank you.
And now for question time this week. We might change the title to conspiracy time, because there's a few people questioning whether the second assassination attempt on Donald Trump was in fact a setup in order to, as I said, boost his ratings. Because every time he gets assassinated, it would seem, I mean, we've got a control group already. And so the majority of times I was assassinated, but every time someone tries to come after the guy, either in a courtroom or in the open air with a gun, his popularity goes up. This is why throughout generations, centuries, people have been reluctant to make martyrs of their enemies, because it means people rally around them. They either feel sorry for them or they think they're valiant or whatever it may be. So the background to this, of course, is that a lot of people thought that the first assassination attempt was a setup, was mocked up in order to boost Donald Trump's popularity. And it certainly boosted his popularity, but it wasn't a setup. I don't think anyone is seriously considering that now. All the evidence is there. The bloke who did it is stone cold dead. So either he was very, very committed to the conspiracy and very, very committed to the Trump campaign, or it just actually happened. And again, in this second case, the bloke has been caught. So if he's in on this conspiracy, this guy is the most committed political operative ever known to humankind. And he's going to have to keep stum about it for a very, very long time. He says, you know what, actually, guys, I was never going to do it. It's all cool. The other thing is, of course, if it really was a setup, why wouldn't he have let a few shots off? Because from what I can gather, I'm not sure if this guy actually even I think the shots that were actually heard was the Secret Service spotting this guy with a rifle, poking through the fence of the golf course and then shooting at him, and then off he runs. So again, if you want to make Donald Trump look like a hero, you got to do a bit better than that, you know? Think of the pics. You got to have the, you know, the bandage on the ear, the blood, you know, the freedom, fight, 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 fight. So again, if it was a bit of heavily crafted stage management by the Trump campaign, I'd say the production values were a little light on. Anyway, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. If you too had a little bit of pleasure, please just leave a review or hit like or give us a 5-star rating. If you didn't like it, no one's going to know if you just hit 5 stars anyway. Of course, if you want to get in contact with us, ask us any questions, want us to tackle any issues, just go to therealstory@novapodcast.com.au. You can slide into my DMs on the gram. That's @Joe_Hildebrand. You can, of course, read any of my columns every Monday and Saturday in the Daily Telegraph and various News Corp mastheads around the country, all quality mastheads around the country, in fact. And I'll see you next week.